Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the penultimate seventh webinar in the Clubhouse of Development webinar series. Today, we're going to be discussing how to fundraise for a facility, and this could include facility build-outs, upgrades, renovations, any kind of projects that you might have around physical assets. That's what we'll be addressing today. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please enter them in the GoToWebinar tool, and we'll make sure to address them before we sign off. First, we'll introduce you to who we are. Cogeo is the leading expert in the sports nonprofit industry. Our management team has 70 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $750 million for more than 200 nonprofit organizations. One of the key reasons that we're passionate about working with sports organizations and soccer clubs is that our leadership has both played and coached the game, and that includes your speaker today, Rob Cusell. As a college All-American and highly successful soccer coach, Rob is now the Managing Director of Consulting Services at Cogeo and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. And with that, I will pass it to you, Rob.
Thanks, Mel. Hello, everyone. So as you can see on slide number 3, this is the 7th of 8 presentations, webinars. And as Mel pointed out, we're going to talk today about build-outs or renovations. We're seeing a lot of renovations around the country of existing facilities, particularly more multi-sport use. So slide number 4. Now we're on the top floor of the clubhouse. And essentially, it's important to have a fairly good understanding of especially the second floor. Which corporations and foundations would support a capital build-out? Where are there major gifts within your current and past constituencies? And then plan giving potentially. The other room we need to add right now is government, because with the American Rescue Plan, which went into effect in March of 2021, $350 billion is being built out. Some has already been spent, but very few communities know about this. And it's really happening at the city and county level. So if you're considering a build out in Tennessee, you need to talk to Mel about the American Rescue Plan and how to engage that. And I'll talk specifically as we look at several case studies later on, how some of our clients are already benefiting. But for a capital campaign, you really need 4 things. You need structure, good leadership, qualified donors, my point about the second floor, and then a strong feasibility and planning study to make sure that whatever it is you're planning, everybody's on the same page. So the next slide, number 5, what are our goals and context for today? We're going to define what a needs assessment, feasibility, and capital campaign, and how they all fit together to successfully manage and complete a capital project. Now remember, this is a multi-year thing, mostly speaking. Unless the project is small, clubhouse renovation, that can happen in a year. You need to analyze and evaluate project readiness, as well as being able to manage the campaign alongside other things, which is really important given the limited resources. And then the process, again, of move management and how data influences the entire campaign, and the importance of data management and systems as it relates to a successful campaign and success thereafter. Slide number 6. So let's define a capital project. It's really a term to describe the process from start to finish of building and or purchasing a physical asset. It could also be an endowment campaign, but that's not relevant for clubs today. It may be in 20 years, but today not so. So 3 major steps. Needs assessment, which really describes the purpose for the capital project based on the strategic priorities of the organization or the state or the governing body. Feasibility, and we'll examine the inner workings of that a little bit later. It really tests the strength of the success, the potential success, and it assesses the needs assessment. And then the capital campaign is the actual execution phase. So if the planning study goes well, and it'll really help to define the initial scope of the capital campaign. Because generally when it comes to a facility build out, particularly if it's large, it'll be in phases. Again, I want to stress this includes both new facilities as well as renovating existing facilities. So what components are part of the needs assessment process? Generally, it's a strategic retreat, which generates or a board meeting, some catalyst, which will generate thinking around the need for owning or long-term lease on land, a club's own facilities, academy's own facility, a league's own facilities, or a governing body own facility. And the idea is to clarify the project, define it. Is it 2 fields, 3 fields? Does it have an indoor space? Is there a clubhouse? Are there other? Is it a multi-sport complex, etc.? Yesterday, we spent an hour with the Oregon State Association doing just that. We finally identified the right land available outside of Portland, Oregon, and there are 3 lots, and we were doing a project definition and clarification on which of the parcels would be most suited to what we were trying to accomplish. And we were literally doing it in a data-driven fashion by allocating numbers between 0 and 10 to all the components that we know are relevant to developing a state-level complex in this case. And that way you have your project needs assessment once you've done all that. The next slide looks at the elements of a feasibility study. So feasibility study really is saying, okay, Club X is planning to build a 3-field facility in this location, including a clubhouse, as well as a futsal court. And so that's where you're testing. And the cost for that build out is, I'll put out a number, let's say $3 million, right? And so you know you're going to test that. You know you've identified the land. You know that's the real need as identified by the board during the assessment and the club itself. And all those components together are what are tested in the feasibility study. And really, it's a matter of just gathering as much data from key potential stakeholders in the community through a questionnaire that's developed and that's specific to the project. And so the process itself is really building the case for support, which I just described in this case, 3-field plus futsal plus administrative clubhouse, cost $3 million. And so you identify those key individuals in the community who need to be interviewed to get as much data as possible on potential prospects, including foundations, government, corporate, businesses in particular, local businesses, as well as high net worth individuals within the club and within the community. And so what happens is the interviews then get conducted. Now we request a minimum of 28 interviews because that's a significant sample. And really they're just a series of interviews where we ask the same questions and get the right data to answer the right questions, to have the right answers, which we then put into the form of a final report, which really are the study results, including 2 parts. The first are, here's what we learned, right? Here's what everybody told us about all of the issues involved here. And the second part, recommendations for proceeding with a campaign. So it essentially gives you a roadmap, including a full plan of action and a logical number that's aggressive, but really that is logical given what was uncovered during the planning study process. Now, not all capital campaigns require a feasibility study. In some instances, there's readiness within the community because it has been discussed for so long, and there are many, many, many stakeholders involved already. So we do an initial audit to understand if, in fact, there is the need for a planning study or not. So once a planning study has been accomplished or not, but we know there's readiness for the actual campaign itself, you don't want to assume anything. So you want to have a checklist that makes sure that you've got all of the key 4 elements at a minimum. And if there are other issues, contingencies, whatever to be dealt with, then we put those under the other bucket. So the first is, do you have the right collateral? And what does that mean? Well, it may be a movie. It may be a documentary. It may be at a minimum a capital campaign case statement. It's going to have some schematics for sure. The corporate deck is really going to speak to return on investment. So that collateral is going to speak a little bit differently than the case statement or the documentary or the video. But collateral is really essential, and this is where we play a big role with our clients in terms of providing all of the background information and actual execution procedures surrounding collateral. On our website, cogeo.us/case, you can see several capital campaign case statements related to soccer, or just ping Mel. She can forward them to you. And then leadership. In the planning study, one of the questions we ask is, who should lead the campaign, and would you help lead the campaign? So if you do a planning study, you're going to get the data naturally, or organically, I should say. Without the planning study, no problem. We do the audit, and we will build the leadership structure as needed. And generally, it takes the form of a couple of administrators, us, and then we put together a campaign advisory group, right, whose sole function is not to ask, but to connect. Qualified prospects, again, high net worth individuals. And you might remember in a past webinar about wealth screening. We do wealth screening, so we know the net worths of families if they're over $1 million. That's a key component. Foundations that support capital buildouts and programs around those buildouts, definitely good prospects. And then businesses and corporations. And then finally, government. Government has proven especially fruitful in the last year because of the American Rescue Plan, which was passed in March of 21, as I mentioned. So we're seeing a lot of funding. And we're talking big funding, multi-million-dollar engagements and potential. And by the way, this is just started, literally, in the last 8 months, 6 months. So this is still nascent. Most communities don't even know about it, as I mentioned. And then the proper campaign structure, which really is part 2 of the planning report. And that gives complete assurance that your campaign is not just going to be, throwing spaghetti at the wall, but it'll have all the components that'll gear it towards success. And then any other issues that emerge that are custom to whatever campaign is being run. So collateral, let's go a little more specifically. At a minimum, a case statement. And if you're not in a capital campaign, you should have an annual case statement. And again, there's many, many examples at that link. Next slide, leadership. So who are these people? Well, board members for sure, current, past, and future. And identifying what their roles are on the board so that you can see, hey, actually, they would fit really well into this campaign, given their relationships in the community, et cetera. And then you need to look at whatever subcommittees currently exist on the board so that we make sure that the campaign committee really complements the rest. And if in fact there's leadership being cultivated and recruited, how could they assist with the campaign? I mentioned past board members. They're always relevant because generally they're older and therefore they may have more time. And then beyond the board member, which parents, key community leaders, government officials, et cetera, should be engaged for all the right reasons. Qualified prospects. Again, every one of our clients is on salesforce.com, which is a free product for 501c3s and foundations. And if you're not on the CRM system, you really should consider getting yourself on Salesforce. We can help there. And then within that CRM, how many entities are there and have they undergone wealth screening in terms of high net worth individuals? That membership-based prospect. Next slide, 13. I mentioned corporation, businesses, and then foundations. Well, it's fine to use the word corporation or business or enterprise or whatever you want to use, but the key is to understanding, one, what type of business they are, because that'll impact their decision-making capability, as well as their relationship to the community. And if, in fact, they want to have that association with the club or the league or the governing body because of what that means from an associative standpoint. And so we know there are 4 types of corporations or businesses. There's C Corp, think Target, Dick's Sporting Goods. These are bigger corporations that do give, but generally they give to many, many organizations, and they give smaller amounts. Witness a typical Dick's Sporting Goods grant or a Target grant. S Corp are single ownership corporations, and these are really good because it's a sole decision maker, and the tax benefits are good. LLCs, same thing. You've got one decision maker, limited liability company. So again, they can literally write the check on the fly and benefit from taxes as well. And then LLPs is an extension of LLC. It's a bunch of partners, so 2, 3, 4 partners. And again, it's beneficial to them from a tax structure. And so we tell people definitely focus on the LLCs and S corps and LLPs. These are the smaller businesses, the small insurance company, all of the franchisees, all that. That's what you're looking at there. C corps, generally it's by application. However, if a large hospital chain happens to be a C corp, then you need to build that relationship. And healthcare should be your priority initially if you're not doing fundraising around businesses. Healthcare and local retail. That's what we're seeing. Car dealerships, food, hospitality, anything hospitality based, particularly if you've got a complex within your vicinity. And then foundations. We do all the work there for our clients, but you should definitely have somebody in the club looking at local foundations, regardless of whether you're doing a facility build out, because they fund programs, particularly if you're doing top soccer, hot shots, anything that will benefit the greater community. So let's be sure to research and see which foundations are relevant, either for your program or for the capital campaign. Next slide, number 14, is on campaign structure. So you need to really ask yourself, okay, well, we're thinking about doing this complex or this 2-field build out or 1 field even, or futsal. We're working with a client in Northern California now whose focus is on building out futsal initially. Then they're going to work with the city to build out a couple fields, turf fields. But the initial look now is on futsal. And so we're rolling out a capital campaign, and we didn't do a planning study because there's strong leadership and they've got a lot of the other ingredients that are necessary. So we're going right into a campaign. But really understanding, okay, what kind of resources internally do you have available? Because here are the things we need generally to operate a capital campaign: an ED or a technical director, a campaign manager, director of development, grant writer, somebody who's going to manage that, somebody who's going to make sure that the database is up to speed, a researcher, somebody who's looking at research for foundations, et cetera, a designer to make sure the collateral is where it needs to be, and then a marketing expert. So here's the good news. Cogeo provides all of that, right? Because all of these elements need to be integrated into the structure of the campaign, and we know that no clubs, no way, has all of these particular components. So that's why we're so effective at what we do and when we do it, because we bring all of these assets in as part of our engagement with, and that's the genius of how we built the company, which is we do it all. All we need is one person on the other side, and we'll get it done. More on structure on slide 15. We set up generally a campaign advisory group or a campaign steering committee, unless you already have an internal committee that's looking at it. Even if you have that, we would modify it, make sure that it's meeting the structure that we're putting together comprehensively for the campaign. And if there is a current overall strategy for organization and campaign success, we would want to know it. Otherwise, we would bring our assets in and make sure that happens. And then most importantly, is there a footprint, right? What are we looking at in terms of the actual build out? And that will impact costs as well as it'll impact the timeline for sure. And then the last one, 16, in terms of campaign readiness, other. So what are the contingencies? Are there any other things that are happening in the club or, that are really important and that could impact the actual campaign? And are there local competing campaigns that would adversely impact, right? Is a hospital running a mega campaign? Is a university in another mega campaign? Generally, we say ignore, but it depends on the actual location around the country. So what are the elements of the capital campaign? Now you're actually going to execute it. You've done everything we just talked about. So how do we do this? Well, there are 5 phases. There's the preparation phase, which is everything we just talked about, making sure the collateral is there, the leadership's there. You've got the database structure, everything in place, renderings, etc. Research is done. Foundation, we've got a whole lineup ready to go. Businesses have been identified and already engaged. Then the second is the quiet phase, where we're talking to key people that we know make a big difference in the campaign. And we're having conversations like, Sheila, we would be remiss not to come to you for the naming rights, knowing that your company fully supports these types of projects in the community. So those are the types of conversations you have early on in the campaign with key donors that can make a big impact on the campaign immediately. And then the lead gift phase are, again, larger gifts that you know are out there from a prospect standpoint, again, across those four phases: government, major donors, foundations, and then businesses. Major gift, which is a little bit lower level gifts, but still important. You still have to have those one-on-one meetings, and there are many more of those. That's generally starts in year 1.5, year 2. And then you want to close out the campaign with a really robust community phase, which is much more interesting today than it was in, say, 2000 because of digital media. Because it really gives you a broader reach and the ability to actually engage a broader swath than just your internal community. So we enjoy those a lot more now because it's not paper driven, it's much more digital. It's not entirely so. And for that, you need to assess, how are my digital systems? You know, is it good? You know, are they working? Are we getting the kind of throughness that we really expect, et cetera? So slide number 18. So where does it fail? Right? Where do they stumble? Right? Because there's lots of stop and go and start, and again, it's the key is that structure. So you could have leadership issues, wrong people. The definition is not really fully understood by the general community before the launch. That's the initial PR. Capacity is not there from donor perspective, and there's no understanding that the capacity is not there. And we see agencies, well, we don't see them, but there are agencies that launch a campaign and they really don't understand if the actual support is there. So that can be an issue. Feasibility. Again, the only time we don't do a planning study, sometimes we just incorporate it as part of the plan. Right? We're about to start a project in Washington State where we're doing a planning study alongside the start of a programmatic campaign going toward a capital campaign. So you need to really understand whether it's feasible and if it's really desired in the location. And then the failure, again, can occur in a lack of planning, right? Because it's not a month-to-month thing. It's not like, okay, let's plan for April. With a capital campaign, it's planning 3 years out, literally. So you're looking at 36 months at a minimum to be sure. And so that's why it's important to have somebody that has had experience in a capital campaign, not as a volunteer, but somebody who's actually directed a capital campaign or been part of a team, whether at a university or a hospital in development, that has done a capital campaign. So big red flag when a board member says, oh, I've been part of a campaign. Well, it's probably as a board member, which means that's not the case at all because they've supported it versus actually directing it, which is completely different. So slide 19. Now we're going to look at some case studies, and I'm probably going to bring up some that aren't even on slides, only because we're involved in so many projects right now that have all the moving parts that I just described. But this one's interesting. This is Springfield, Missouri, Lake Country Soccer, Southwest Missouri Rush. And this is an existing complex undergoing a full renovation. So think 13 fields, including a stadium, and then an indoor facility with 2 pretty big courts and administrative. And the idea is to turf and light all the fields to make it a really, really compelling place to go. So there's upgrades to the stadium occurring as well in the indoor facility. Case statement is on our website. Check it out, Lake Country Soccer. We did the well screening, so we're working on that. We definitely set up a steering committee through the board of directors. Most importantly, we did an economic impact analysis on, look, city council, if the place was turfed and lit as soon as possible in its entirety, this would be the economic impact on the city of Springfield and the businesses locally. And it was just so compelling that city council, because they had done the right thing and applied for American Rescue Plan funds, so they were flush with money that can be directed toward improving current facilities, they engaged. We also engaged the Springfield Sport Authority as well as the local county. The next slide, you can see the north and the south, how the complex is built with the indoor facility. We got Coca-Cola as a sponsor. And then on the bottom right is a rendition of what we're planning to do for an administrative center. So what happened with City Council? They've already invested $5 million, and they're looking to invest another $5 million. We're talking to county about they're investing $5 million in the facility, so that's $15 million, 5 of which has already been paid. And just 2 weeks ago, they were able, because now it's a certainty that it's going to be turfed and lit. There's a local college that has a large club lacrosse program, and they don't have any fields, and so they rented for a period of 10 years. They did a $1.5 million at $150,000 a year for 10 years rental, guaranteed annuity. That wasn't budgeted in terms of revenue. And they're in negotiations now with another Bible college to do the same thing for $300,000. So lesser, it's $30,000 a year, but 10 years. So that's $1.8 million guarantee that they'll see for the next 10 years at a rate of $180,000 a year. So they're also in discussions. Their Southwest Missouri Rush program, Capelli Sports, is a major sponsor. So they're also in discussions, or actually it's a closed ear for all the Rush teams nationally, globally. There are discussions with Capelli about naming rights, as well as Southeast Medical or something as well. So there's lots going on because the city invested. Now you've got others that are coming in because they know it's going to happen, and everybody wants in now. That's a great initiative, and it's going to be fantastic for the Midwest. Slide number 21, a little bit different. Now we're moving to Florida. Some of you have been to Seminole Soccer Complex in Orlando, Stanford, actually. It's right outside of Orlando. And so same thing here. They're looking to renovate that complex and really benefit from it. So this is what an economic impact analysis looks like. Right? On the left, non-local visitors. What does a visitor spend per day? On average, per person, $120, and that includes meals, gas, hotel, and all that stuff. Tournaments, number of tournaments. We determined they could host 4 tournaments, 655 teams in total. So that represents 40,000 hotel stays, and then almost 100,000 non-local visitor days. Then we estimated the economic impact at $12 million, which is not insignificant. So it was compelling. The Orlando Sports Authority is looking at it, and it's gotten some good traction in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. Then we did a slide 22 on this is their reach in terms of their digital reach. And this was done mostly for local businesses to see, hey, if you associate with us, you now will have access to 60,000 unique visitors to the facility and put your banner up as an insurance company or whatever. We'll promote you in our Facebook feed. That may not be as great today as it was last week, but anyway, we have 2,700 Twitter followers, and you'll be promoted there, and then Instagram. So just data to show that, hey, you partner with us, you can get this kind of reach. And then for those who are really interested in naming rights and banners and sort of visibility, because there is a ton of foot traffic at Seminole, we put together just sponsorship packages. So the purple is at $25,000 per year, gold is at $10,000, and then we itemize what visibility occurs, as well as a description of that item. So premier stadium sponsor, number of fence banners, permanent signs, stadium signs, windsock flags, and then what happens with digital in terms of website advertising and social media. So it's comprehensive, and it's good to have different levels because people have different budgets in corporations. And then for the actual naming rights, again, we recommend that this occur on an annual basis. The concept of permanent naming rights is pretty much out the window these days. So in this case, if you want the naming rights to the complex for a year, it's $100,000 with 2-year minimum. Stadium, $50,000. Parking lot, which is a huge part of the complex because it divides the complex into 200 power lines. So it gets lots of visibility, 10. And then there are 11 fields there, 5,000 per. And we've named many of those actually. A smaller build out, slide number 25, is happening now in Walnut Creek, California, Northern California. The club I was talking about earlier with the futsal is Ballistic United, which is city next door, but this is Walnut Creek. And they're looking to build out 2 fields, turf and light it. It's a wealthy area. So when we did the well screening, because Silicon Valley and the influence there with tech, high tech, they were staggered. They had no idea that some of their parents had that kind of wealth, and that happens with pretty much every client that we, when we do this. Strong leadership, good leadership, and then Steve is a very, very strong executive director. So they have all the elements to be successful. The project went on hold. It's about to relaunch because of, again, in this case, leadership hiccups. Not with the executive director, but with board members. But we're very confident that's going to be a very successful build-up. So some of the other projects, so you get a sense that we're involved with. An interesting one. Actually, Mel, go to slide 26. They can get a sense of what we're trying to do with Walnut Creek. The visuals are actually a little bit off. These are going to be full-size fields, not 77. The next slide is really interesting. We're working with Oregon Youth Soccer Association to, one, reactivate their foundation. So we put together a new board of directors, a new executive director, Scott. And Oregon has no state level complex. So the idea here is for the foundation to lead the funding for the build out of a national or state level complex. And ironically, we spent an hour and a half yesterday on the phone doing that assessment, as I described earlier, because we've identified that ideal site, which is in Canby, Oregon. And the city of Canby essentially has 3 footprints available, one of which is awesome. It's a freestanding 80-acre facility that's never been used. It's kind of wild, wooded area that could be flattened and really leveraged. So we came away from our assessment with that particular parcel as the. We also heard from the city. We had a conference call with city leaders 10 days ago that they really want to have a multi-sport complex, including softball, baseball. There are big sports there, and lacrosse. Lacrosse is big in Oregon, and maybe even American football as well. And so it'll definitely be a multi-sport complex, which an 80-acre facility, it makes a lot of sense. So we're launching a planning study. Now that we have the footprint, we're about to launch the planning study. We've got a great list of interviewees, including people at Nike and some of the big, Microsoft, some of the key corporations around there. And so that's good. That's going well. And if in fact we do work with the city of Canby, and it looks positive, and with that 80-acre facility, it'll clearly expand over time. We'll start with soccer, obviously, given that it's Oregon Youth Soccer Association, but it'll expand to multi-sport use over time. And this one will definitely be a phased approach, but we're already talking to ARP folks in that county about hopefully accelerating that with funding for that. Another client we're working with that's interesting is Cal North, which is another governing body. So it's the equivalent of Tennessee Soccer Association. And in their case, they manage 3 facilities around Northern California. And we're doing the same thing. We're looking at ARP specifically in each of those counties and cities and seeing if we can accelerate funding for that. And that includes Cherry Island in Sacramento, Morgan Hill near San Jose, and Ripon, which is in Central California, a larger facility. The other thing we're doing in parallel, this is interesting, is we've engaged with an individual who represents a major European team who's interested in launching an academy in Northern California. And for that, we're looking specifically at the Ripon complex because it's not, there's a lot of space around it for the actual academy. So that's an interesting conversation that's going on around. And that's what happens when you have a complex. It creates all sorts of potential. So I'm going to stop there. I don't know if there are any questions, Mel. I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I'll pass it to you.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Yeah, we do have one interesting question. It says, in your experience, what % of feasibility studies go forward?
Brilliant question. We have, ironically, most consultants will say, oh, everything's great, because they want the work, right? They want to be able to do the work beyond that. We don't operate that way. So I've actually, we call it red light and green light. Green light is go at whatever level. You know, you may have tested 10 million, but you can only do 2 million initially. That's good. It's a start because it'll get you something. A red light is there's a lot that needs to be done, or there's no way the community could support. Now, when do you get a red light? I'll give you an example. We did a planning study for Habitat for Humanity because we work with other 501c3s that aren't soccer clubs. Habitat for Humanity in, I won't name the place, but it was a big Habitat for Humanity. And so one of the questions in the planning study is, feasibility study is, can you give us some feedback on the leadership, on the executive director, the board of directors? And 6 interviews into the planning study, it turned out everybody hated the executive director, and the board had no idea. And so that was a big red flag. And so we went to the chair and we said, look, here's the deal. She said, carry on. When it came time to give the final report, we told the truth and said, there is absolutely no way this is going to go unless you fire Robert. Now, he wasn't in that meeting, but you can imagine what went on thereafter. Other times, there's just not readiness within the community. We did a planning study in Reno, California, for a really interesting group, and there just wasn't readiness within their community. They wanted to expand across the country and do a lot really fast, even though they were pretty young. And the general community said, no, they need to do much better at what they're currently doing before they go off to Vermont or wherever they're going to go. And we told them, we said, no, you can't, because you're not going to get the support. So great question. It really is objective data gathering, and you're absolutely right. Oftentimes, it's just not going to fly for whatever reason. Thanks, Mel.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. That was the only question we have right now, but I'll make sure to send out a recording of this webinar and the link to the Tennessee Soccer platform that's on the Cogeo.us website. And you'll be able to access different resources that were mentioned today, including a article about the American Rescue Plan funding opportunities. So you'll be able to have a little bit more information on that because it's very timely, and an easy option to chat with Cogeo. So if you want to chat specifically about that or anything else to do with capital campaigns or any other kind of fundraising, you'll be able to do that there. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks Rob for presenting. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.